As a world-leading smart city, Abu Dhabi has incorporated a resilient fintech ecosystem as the bedrock for their development as well as for their infrastructure. We shall soon be hearing how the new framework in promoting fintech innovation as well as economic growth has spurred a smarter economy and opportunity for collaboration. Up next, we're about to invite on stage Ms. Gabrielle Inzirillo, Head of Ecosystem Development from Financial Services Regulatory Authority at the Abu Dhabi Global Market, to have a keynote chat with Ms. Ella Arwyn-Jones, Managing Director of FinanceAsia, on the important topic of fintech innovation to accelerate a smart economy. So let's put our hands together to welcome Gabrielle and Ella. Welcome.
Hello, everyone, and it's great to be here for the Digital Economy Summit. My name is Ella, and I'm the editor of FinanceAsia and Corporate Treasurer here in Hong Kong. I'm really delighted to have with me Gabrielle Inzirillo, who is Head of Ecosystem Development at the Financial Services Regulatory Authority over in Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Gabrielle.
Thank you so much.
So we're focusing today on how fintech supports the acceleration of ecosystems and in particular smart cities. To start with, Gabrielle, can I ask you to give a bit of a brief overview of your remit, your role as a regulator?
Sure, absolutely. So you're probably thinking, why a financial regulator talking about smart cities, right? Well, what we like to do within ADGM, so Abu Dhabi Global Market, is that even though we are a financial regulator, we're very, very aware that money touches all aspects of people's lives, right? So it's always very important for us to have an overview of what is happening and how technology is evolving to see where that impacts these monetary aspects in order to protect people and to protect institutions as well. So as the head of ecosystem development, my role is to enable responsible innovation in a number of different ways. So through public consultations, industry engagements, overseeing, for instance, firms that don't fit within our regulatory frameworks, but should probably be overseen in some form or other. And that's essentially the very exciting work I get to do.
Fantastic. And so you're really looking at all aspects of tech and their impact in the financial environment, really. I wonder if you could briefly talk us through about how exactly fintech has, or innovation in the fintech sector has really changed over the past 5 years or so?
So I think the most important aspects of how it's changed is that people don't see the innovation of tech and the transformation of tech as having monetary implications, when actually it really very much does. And I don't want to drone on too much about fintech, because I know that tomorrow you're going to have the Fintech Summit that's really going to have a focus on that. And I know you guys are talking about Web3 and such. But what we're seeing is that 10, 15 years ago, people were so excited about disrupting finance, right? They wanted to disrupt banking. They wanted to be a new bank for a new generation of people. They wanted to go full contactless with payments. They wanted to do these new things and really rock finance at its core. Nowadays, what we're seeing is that there's something more subtle that's happening. There's financial implications in technology that we didn't see before and that people are not even aware of. And I think that's really fundamentally the most interesting part. And I know we had a little pre-chat before about this, but just to give you an example is if we look at the gaming industry, look at video games, so many of you, I'm sure, or you yourselves have children that are playing video games at home, and they're going in there and they're earning tokens, for instance, they're earning in-game currencies, they're using that to like buy in-game skins for their characters. Well, what if those tokens, for instance, they can start using them to buy other things? They can, play, earn tokens, use them to buy skins in other games. What if at some point they can even use them to buy things in real life? Well, what we're seeing is that there's a development of a financial ecosystem that's actually being built in the video gaming industry that's been based on virtual assets and tokens. So should a financial regulator be involved in the video game industry? A lot of people would say no, right?
Good question, yeah.
Right? But then also, if it starts, if it looks, it smells like a financial instrument, it might be a financial instrument. And so it's very, very interesting because we're having a whole generation of people that are going to be using these, tokens or using all sorts of things, and they don't realize that they are part of a financial ecosystem.
So they're participating in it kind of naturally as part of their daily lives without really being conscious of it.
Exactly, exactly.
And actually, you touched on a really interesting point there. With video games, the past week or so has seen quite a lot of involvement or chat around Saudi's involvement and investment in that arena. So it definitely seems to be a developing space when it comes to, the digital development as a whole and how regulators are trying to tackle or be on top of some of the developments there. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the culture in Abu Dhabi that supports its development as a smart city.
So we're actually very lucky. So Abu Dhabi was ranked, I believe, the smartest city in the Middle East, very, very closely followed by Dubai. So really, ultimately, we can consider it one ecosystem altogether, whether it's Abu Dhabi or Dubai. I don't want anybody to pick favorites over the UAE scene. But I think what we've been very blessed, particularly in Abu Dhabi, is that, as you know, Abu Dhabi is an economy that has its foundations in an economy of oil, so quite a bit of oil that's created quite a bit of richness. And with richness, comes responsibility on how to deploy that. And as we saw in a number of the other keynotes, when we talk about a smart city, when we talk about integrating smartness into an urban environment, it very much goes hand in hand also with sustainability. And so the idea is that Abu Dhabi is using quite a bit of, I guess, its richness from the ground in order to disconnect from that and be able to live a little bit without it as well. And so we've been able to put a ton of investments into really piloting sustainability and smart city projects. So for instance, we have a smart city, specifically a smart city called Masdar, which we were able to build from the ground up, considered like a neighborhood of Abu Dhabi. And the idea is every single smart city pilot project is launched in Masdar. So whether it's, for instance, vertical gardens, vertical smart gardens that for the residents, or whether it's new ways of transportation, so really pushing away cars, because the UAE is a very car-centric country, to really look at new ways of public transportation that are green, easier, and that fit into citizens' lives. It's all being piloted in the city, in Masdar, in order to then be deployed in the greater UAE region. And we're seeing all sorts of use cases come out, right?
Okay. And on the kind of topic of pilots, I guess that's really where the Financial Services Regulatory Authority can really serve a purpose in terms of fostering that innovation, helping it develop with a degree of compliance. How does that work exactly? How do you balance wanting to support innovation with that regulatory oversight?
Well, I think the first and foremost most important thing is not killing projects. And I think it's very easy as a regulator to say, no, we don't like this. So sometimes it takes a little bit to take a step back and to very much look at a project and see what it's worth for the citizens. Let's not forget that we are nonetheless, we are civil servants. We do this for the community, we do this for the people. So we have to look at the benefits for people, but also the risks, and see if something makes sense for us to go out on a limb for. Now, do keep in mind that Abu Dhabi, nonetheless, and particularly from a smart city focus, most of the big smart city applications were really done on an industrial setting. So when you think about the UAE, for instance, you wouldn't realize that there are just kilometers of vertical farming that's happening in the middle of the desert. All that is powered by smart technology, by looking at the humidity of the plants, by doing the perfect setting for the growth, and in a way, as a means of making the UAE an independent country and not making it reliant on other countries for food, for instance. So we've had these smart city, these applications that are being used on a wide-scale industrial setting, but that are now slowly trickling into this urban environment. And that's being fed by a number of different authorities. So not just the financial regulator, of course, but we have digital identity. That's very important. So being able to identify people, know where they are, know what services they're entitled to. So that feeds into, know your customer and KYC issues. We have other projects like, having services or information on the blockchain that's possible. Though, let's be honest, the blockchain isn't always the most sustainable technology. So how smart it is to be seen. We're still trying to figure out the right applications. But yeah, no, so it's just, and then seeing, for instance, where the regulator fits in. For instance, in machine-to-machine payments, who is the competent authority of that? Is it a regulator overseeing it? If there's a mistake, what recourse will we take? Is it against the person or is it against the machine? So it's all these philosophical questions that we have to ask as we try to, as a city becomes smarter, and we as human beings, or we as the people who actually live in that city, kind of detach from it and let it do its thing.
I think you've touched on two really interesting points there. One around sustainability and, how the smart economy supports Abu Dhabi's self-sufficiency as a whole. And then secondly, on decentralized finance and those kind of areas where there's no overseeing, no single authority that's responsible over a particular area. I was listening to a really interesting podcast. It was Bloomberg Technology this week. And they raised the point that when the internet came about, we had email, and that was the first primary use case that everybody could associate and kind of see the purpose behind. And then they were talking about blockchain and crypto in particular, and how Bitcoin was the initial kind of player to really dominate the market, and that there were certain regulations developed around crypto in the sense of currencies such as Bitcoin. But there's so much more, and there's a continuing evolution at hand that we're seeing there. And I guess the conversation really in the past 6 months, all of the conversations I've been having with financial participants has really shifted from crypto to AI, and the application of AI and the considerations around that go with smart city development as well. I wonder if you could give us a sense of some of the developments that you're most excited about, whether that's related to regulation or those certain technologies. You've touched on blockchain there in particular.
So blockchain is evidently interesting, especially within smart cities, because you can essentially have smart contracts that will be functioning without the need of people. Right? So let's say you're connected to a grid, you have energy, all of this is powered by whether you need to give or receive energy. It'll be powered by a utility token. It might be powered by a smart contract, right? That will decide, if I receive so-and-so energy from my neighbor, lots of sun in the UAE. So even though we have oil, we also have a lot of sun. So we can be very, very solar powered too. But let's say you're sharing energy with your neighbors. This is governed by a smart contract. Something goes wrong, right? How do you arbitrate a dispute if a smart contract goes wrong? Because I think we mentioned this earlier, but ultimately, when you look at the promises behind blockchain, the promises behind virtual assets, the idea is that it's fully transparent. So you don't need someone to oversee things because the community as a whole can see through it and can self-govern. What we're finding as a regulator, and what we're trying to upskill tremendously in, is that in fact the community struggles to self-govern, because how many people can actually look through the lines of code of a smart contract and tell you, yes, this is a good, well-written contract?
Sure, it's the experts, the coders who...
Exactly, and then also for a lot of coders, a lot of people that are very excited in this industry and that are really, jumping headfirst into it. The majority are actually quite young, They're in their early 20s, they're in their 30s, they're excited about building a future. And many of them, for instance, they've never experienced the ups and downs of life that can cause issues. So for instance, if you have a black swan event, right, something that you've never expected, you've never lived through a proper financial downfall, how can you expect your contract or your code to react when things go to extremes? will your code write as well, or will it have the proper response? And so we're seeing, that it's very, very hard to actually assess these and actually approve them or authentify them in a way, simply because the talent is needed. There's still a learning curve. And the community as a whole can sometimes be impaired with its judgment because we bandy out the terms of, oh, it's smart, oh, it's code, right? It's not going to rely on people. Well, sometimes if code goes wrong, code goes really wrong.
Sure, yeah. But how do you exactly prepare for that? I know you're involved in various sandboxes and kind of policy discussions. Is it a case of piloting things and having different expertise, different players involved?
I think there are many, many answers for that, many ways of going about it. And I think so far, no one in the global community has really hit on the perfect response. For instance, we have a tech and data governance unit that tries to sort of look at these issues. But ultimately, we as a regulator, we can't give stamps of approval on someone's code directly. So will there be a body that will eventually be created to do that? And then will there be like a code regulator? There could be, right?
Gosh, yeah.
But ultimately, when it comes down to it, it really is philosophical questions that will at some point become very concrete.
Okay. And so in terms of smart city development specifically, what trends are you most excited about for their potential to accelerate developments?
A number of different things. I think that one thing that's very, very good is the push for more digital identity. That's very important. For one, it does make access to services a lot easier, and in a way, I do believe that it gives people independence, right?
Okay.
If you have your digital identity, if you are recognized as who you are, you have easier access to public services, right? You don't have to pull together a bunch of documents together in order to get access to a fundamental service that you as a citizen or a resident should have. With digital identity, they know exactly who you are, what you are.
More
and I know
efficient.
it's a very, very silly example, but for instance, in Dubai airport, so shout out to Dubai today, I don't even use my passport anymore. I just go in on my face. I go through immigration on my face. I sort of stand there. I look pretty. And suddenly I see my name pop up.
Gosh.
And it's having this access to these services that I think is what makes a city particularly smart, because it's working for its people.
Okay. So the infrastructure is there to support
People.
society. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. But I guess with those trends and developments come some risks. We've seen a lot in the news recently about kind of data protection, security, privacy, falling into the wrong hands. So there are those concerns also.
That we are upskilling our firms tremendously with. We currently are doing quite a bit of education and upskilling for the firms, implying also that they should have data protection officers in all their firms in order to protect. Because nonetheless, even though it's something that's very, very good for this access, it's also, you don't want it to become common knowledge, right? So the best you can do is really try to teach the firms and teach those under your remit how to do it appropriately.
Okay, so education is key. Finally, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I wonder if you can talk about the opportunity for collaboration internationally. I know you liaise very closely with Hong Kong. What are some of the projects that you're working on together?
So one thing that's very interesting is that so the UAE, as you all know, is a federation of emirates. So we all have our own governing bodies within each emirate. So as you know, I'm within Abu Dhabi. I know that there's a roundtable afterwards with Dubai, so you're going to be able to see both sides. And I think what each of us within our emirate is doing is, even though we collaborate together, we also collaborate with the federal government. And each one is trying to, give really good pilot projects, really good test projects, so that they'll be adopted at a federal level. And I think what's very nice about Hong Kong is that there's this similar approach of being this testing ground for new technology and new innovation for China as a whole, but also the world. And so I think there's a lot of very close liaison and close rapport, because we're so both both Hong Kong and Abu Dhabi, and are trying very much to build these sandboxes, prove this technology, and then send it out, whether it's on a more national level or whether it's more, global level. But we've been very lucky that now that, travel has opened up again since the pandemic. We've had a few delegations from Hong Kong that visited, and they've come to learn, and then hopefully and I'm terribly happy to be back here. So it's very nice to, be able to share this information together and hopefully, have more projects coming over and vice versa.
Fantastic. It sounds like there's a lot of knowledge sharing there and parallels between the communities as well, with significant institutional participants, kind of the digitally forward thinking of society. I'm sure the audience will have some questions for you, Gabrielle, and that they can come up to you through the networking sessions later today and the opportunities there. Thank you ever so much for talking us through your efforts in supporting the digital economy and smarter future.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.